Today we're going to go over isosceles and equilateral triangles. So yes, we've kind of talked about isosceles and equilateral, but now we're going to specifically talk about them. So first off, talking about an isosceles triangle, we're going to label the different parts. So the legs of your isosceles triangle, if I look over here, would be side AC and side CB. Okay, so the legs of an isosceles triangle are those congruent sides. Those are what the legs are. The vertex, okay, your vertex is an angle. It is the angle between your two congruent sides. So my vertex here would be angle C. And then the base angles of an isosceles triangle would be your other two angles, okay, opposite your congruent sides. Okay, so angle A and angle B, or you could have said angle 1 and angle 2. Okay, those are your base angles. So we do have an isosceles triangle theorem. Okay, it says if two sides of a triangle are congruent, then the angle opposite those sides are congruent. We should say angles. And the angles opposite those sides are congruent. Okay, so in my picture here, if I have my two sides congruent, okay, I know it's an isosceles triangle, those two sides are congruent, then I can say the angles that are opposite those two sides are also congruent. So the base angles are congruent. We do have a converse of this theorem. Okay, so the backwards statement of this. So if two angles of a triangle are congruent, then the sides opposite those angles are also congruent. Okay, same thing, just reverse. So if I have my angles congruent in my triangle, then since those angles are congruent, the opposite sides, or the sides across from each of those angles, would be congruent. Okay, so in your isosceles triangle, your base angles are congruent. If your base angles are congruent, then your sides are congruent. Does that make sense? All right, so we're going to use those theorems to answer the following questions. So in number 4, or 1, I don't know why it's labeled 4, we're going to find the measure of angle B. Okay, so that's this angle right here. Since I know AB is congruent to AC, I know my opposite angles here from those sides would have to be congruent. So angle C would have to be congruent to angle B. And since angle C is 60 degrees, angle B also has to be 60 degrees. Okay, number 5. We want to find the measure of angle D, so that's this angle right here. I have angle E is 40. Now, since I have my two sides here congruent, my opposite angles are also congruent. Okay. Now, to find one of those angles, what do all three of my angles have to add to be? 180. So I can subtract 40 to get 140. Now that 140 has to be split between my two congruent angles. So I can divide it by 2. So the measure of angle D is going to be 70 degrees. Okay, next one, we want to find AC. So since I have congruent angles, I know the sides opposite those angles are congruent. And since AB is 4, that means AC also has to be 4. Not too bad? Questions on those first ones? Okay. Then looking at my next one here, I want to find the value of x. So there are a couple different ways that you could do this problem. So again, I have congruent sides, right? So my opposite angles are congruent. So that means Q is congruent to R. What does that make R? 2x. Okay, now all three of my angles have to add to be 180. So I can add up all three of those and set it equal to 180. So the 40, the 2x, and the 2x. Okay, so I have 40 combined like terms plus 4x equals 180. Subtract 40. And divide by 4. X will be 35. That's one way. Another way you could do this. You can do it similar to what we did in this one. So since I know this angle is 40, if I would take 180 and subtract 40, right, I would get 140. That would have to be divided between my two congruent angles. So I divide it by 2 to get 70. Then each of these angles would have to equal 70. So I could set 2x equal to 70 and still get x is 35. Whichever way you like better, doesn't matter. Does that make sense? Okay, looking at number 8 then. And at number 8, we want to find x. And we know angle S is congruent to angle T. So our opposite sides are congruent. Since those sides are congruent, I can set them equal to each other. Okay, so I'm going to subtract 2x. Add 6. X is 12. Questions on either of those two problems?
No.
Okay, I want you guys to do the 2 on the top of the next side. So on that back page, I want you guys to do the 2 problems at the top there.
So much no. Is this true?
I don't know yet.
Well, may I ask why?
Because, not that I don't trust you, but people have been destroying the breakout space lately.
Well, you know it's not me.
Right, that's why I said I trust you.
But like you don't. You're not about
But
it.
if, like, she could get in trouble for it, like, even if it's not us, because there's not really one to.
They're cameras. But exactly. They do use it. Yes.
I mean, the cameras aren't really effective because there's a camera right by the front door, And I watched people try to walk out and go to there and then someone else went in.
Well, plus 2 is 14.
They're probably seeing this, probably the cash.
And these two girls left during advisory, went to picture, and then other people let them in.
They don't sit there and monitor the cameras. They only look back. Yeah, they look back if somebody reports it.
Oh, yeah, but
And if you like know what time, that's a better situation. If you know the time of that, then look back at that time.
People could just leave and they got no.
Well, then tell somebody.
Sounds like public schools.
Tell somebody about it. And they'll look back at the camera and then they'll get in trouble.
I think it every
Because I
day.
left, got food for people, and people got back in.
Mm-hmm.
It was sad, because I went to my sister's locker, and we were like, people were waiting by the window doors, and people left people
I
that
really
went to
don't know
window.
how to do that.
People that in.
Advisory is an open campus. Only lunch is open campus, so people can't leave school during advisory unless they have college or.
What if you're hungry? You don't know. That's a good lunch.
No, it's not.
No.
Lunch is the only time we have open campus. Advisory, you're not allowed to go unless you have college or apprenticeship.
Oof.
Yep. All right, so looking at number 9. So these two sides are congruent, meaning angle A and angle C are congruent. So angle C is also 6x plus 6. So since I now have all 3 angles of my triangle, I can add them all up and set it equal to 180.
Where are my papers? Where are my
So I added all of these up, set it equal to 180, and you should end up with x is equal to 12. Okay, questions on number 9? Okay, then number 10. Okay, number 10, I have my 2 sides congruent here, meaning angle M and angle O are congruent. This should be a capital M. I don't know why it's not. Those 2 angles are congruent. Now, this is a right triangle. What does that make these 2 angles?
90 degrees added together.
Yes, which would be? Which one of them?
45.
45. Okay, so each of those angles would be 45 degrees.
And then divide 45 by 5.
Yes. So I can set 5x equal to 45. So x would be 9. Now if you add it all up, set it equal to 180, you'd get the same answer. But that's just an easier way to think about it. Questions on those 2 problems? All right, then I want to go over equilateral triangles. Okay, so we just did isosceles, now moving on to equilateral. So an equilateral triangle has 3 congruent sides. So all 3 sides have to be congruent. Our equilateral triangle theorems, just like we had isosceles triangle theorems, right? The first one says a triangle is equilateral if and only if it is equiangular. What does that mean?
All the angles are the same.
All the angles are congruent. That's what equiangular means. Okay? Each angle of an equilateral triangle measures to 60 degrees. So if it's an equilateral triangle, all 3 of those angles have to be 60. Okay? Because I can take 180 divided by 3, right? That gives me 60. So, our example problems for equilateral triangles here. First one, I have all 3 of my sides are equal. That means all 3 of my angles are equal. That means all 3 of my angles have to be 60 degrees. So in order to find x, I can set angle F, which is 6x, equal to that 60 degrees. So divide by 6, and x will be 10. Okay, number 2, for this one, it shows that all 3 of my angles are equal, and if all 3 of my angles are equal, that means all 3 of my sides have to be, and it is an equilateral triangle. So since all of my sides are equal, I can set these two lengths equal to each other. So 6x minus 5 is equal to 5x. So I'll subtract 6x. So I have negative 5 equals negative x. Divide by negative 1, and x is 5. All right, so any questions on those first two? All right, number 3 then. I'm given these two sides are congruent. It doesn't say anything about this side. However, I know that these two angles must be congruent by our isosceles triangle theorem. So if I wanted to find those, I would take 180, subtract 60, right? That's 120. And that divided by 2 is 60. So since both of these angles are also 60, that would make that an equilateral triangle. So that means this side is equal to the other two. Okay? So since those are equal, we can set 3x plus 8 equal to 4x minus 4. Subtract 3x from both sides. So we have 8 equals x minus 4. Add 4. And x is 12. Questions on those ones? Okay, I want you guys to do 9 and 10 here. I know my numbering's a little off. It's okay. It's fine. Do these two problems for me, please.
What are you going to say?
I'm gonna go over the two problems and then I will let you read. I'm gonna go over the two problems.
Oh, you're not, okay. You do, or, yeah, you do. They are.
Okay, I'm gonna start going over these so that I can give you some time to work on your assignment. So number 9, we have to find x and y. So since these two sides are congruent, that means these two angles are congruent, meaning angle C is also 2x. So since all 3 of these are 2x, that means they're all congruent to each other, making all 3 of them 60 degrees. Okay, so since 2x is the same as 60, we can set 2x equal to 60 to get x is equal to 30. Okay, next I want to find y. Now since all 3 of my angles are congruent, that means all 3 of my sides have to be congruent. So I can set 4y minus 5 equal to 3. So add 5, so we have 4y equals 8. To get y is equal to 2. Okay, questions on that one? Then looking at number 10, since these two sides are congruent, that means these two angles are congruent. Okay, this one is not an equilateral triangle, it is isosceles, since this angle is 80. Okay, so that means this angle is also 6x plus 8. So to solve for x, I can add all 3 of my angles together and set it equal to 180. Okay, so all 3 of those added together should be 180. And once you combine like terms and solve, you should get x is equal to 7. Okay, so I have x is 7. Then to solve for y, since these two sides are congruent, I can set those two equal to each other. Okay, so I should get y is equal to 2. Questions on that last problem there?
No.
You can go to the breakout space if you're done.
No,
You are done.
there's one problem.
No, you're done.
Where else am I supposed to go?
Also, that is not 44.
This one I had a question about.
Okay.
So
So
this
this-
is 180 making it.
Right, so
supplementary.
what would that angle have to be then?
So it's 180 minus 100, so that have to, oh, okay,
That had
I
to
see
be
what I
80.
did wrong.
That would have to be 80.
Okay, I see what I did wrong.
But I'll mark it off wrong.
Sorry.
I don't want.
There.